Hello. All right, so I'm here to talk about protein source and whether or not they affect nutrient utilization in adult honeybees. So there's two types of supplementation we use in our common practices in beekeeping. The first being carbohydrates, so your sugar syrup feeding, which we probably won't go into much, and protein supplementation, which is broken up into two categories. You've got your protein supplements. These are your tonics that you mix with your sugar syrup and feed to your hive. And then there's protein substitutes, which are like your pollen patties, which are pretty common use in New Zealand. So last year, around 500,000 hives, which is over half our hives, were fed protein supplements. And the most common one of them was Mega Bee, which runs at about $3 a patty, and at 500,000 hives, that's $1.5 million that was spent. And that's just basing it off one feeding, where a lot of beekeepers would use 3 or 4. So it's a lot of money. It's quite a lot of money, especially considering that there is no clear consensus around the risks and rewards in this area. So these 3 studies here show advantages in honey production or no effect. The one that did show an advantage in honey production was repeated again the next year and found that there wasn't an effect. And then these 2 studies here show that there was increased nosema levels and increased queen failure rates. So it kind of just underlines how there is a bit of a disagreement out there on the effectiveness of pollen substitutes. So we did a study recently which focused on pollen substitutes and their effect on the development of hypopharyngeal glands in newly emerged bees. So we took, newly emerged bees use protein to develop their hypopharyngeal glands, and so they need it. So we decided to, we got 30 bees, newly emerged bees, from a range of hives, from 10 hives, put them in like a little cage with a sugar syrup feeder and a different protein source. We used 5 different protein sources, treatments, and we had 8 replicates, and so we put them into an incubator at 32 degrees and kept them for 14 days and monitored them. And during this time, we monitored mortality, so how many deaths there were pretty much, and consumption, so how much protein was actually being used. And during that time, we found that there was no variation across the products that we used. After the 14-day period, we dissected the bees and measured the hypopharyngeal gland development and found that there was indeed variation across the products, which is fairly important if you're spending so much money on it. In saying that, this was done in a controlled study in a lab without environmental factors and stuff like that, so results should be taken with a grain of salt. Wow, I'm whipping through the time. So to further work on management practices, we need to answer a whole lot more questions in the area. The first one being how and if bees even utilize protein substitutes. So this is a photo where a beekeeper is fed protein substitutes to a hive and then found that it's been discarded out the back. So that draws to the question as to if they're even using it, and we don't really understand the mechanisms behind them actually using it. The next one is the environmental factors and how they affect the impact that supplements have on hive strength and health. Our beekeepers operate in a range of areas and environments and so many different factors around the country. So understanding the relationship between the environmental factors the protein substitutes, and the hive strength and hive health is an area that really needs development, because at the moment a lot of people are operating blind. And the sharp end of the stick is designing metrics so that we can assess colonies, so we can find out what the colony needs and how to get it to them effectively, so that hives can be managed well by their beekeepers. So this weekend there's been a lot of talk around protein supplements and substitutes, and something that Dave Mendes mentioned was that if you're going to use something, use it on half your apiary, because what works for one person might not work for another. With so much variation out there and unknown factors and stuff, it's really good to try what works best for you. And once those knowledge gaps get filled, we can move on and really work more efficiently and effectively. Yeah, thank you.